It all started with one photograph. Black and white, faded, its edges curled. Two young boys stood barefoot in the dust, arms stiff at their sides, their eyes wrong, mouths slack. Slightly behind the camera was where one looked. The other seemed to be looking at nothing at all. Their faces matched, but not cleanly. Something lopsided was about them, something you couldn't quite name. The same soul, people used to say, born split into uneven halves. But a different kind of story was whispered by those who knew them better, the ones who lived in that part of Appalachia, a story soaked in old blood and older guilt. By their grandfather, the twins were raised, a man who hadn't spoken to another adult in over 20 years. Deep in a hollow outside Hyen, Kentucky, his cabin sat, almost unreachable by road. Heavy is how the land around it still feels, the locals say, like the trees are listening. More shadow than flesh, they said that man was. No birth records, no marriage license, no name in the county books after 1921. But those boys he had, and from the world he kept them like two secrets he never meant to tell. From 1938 to 1954, what happened in that cabin has never been documented. No newspaper touched it. No police file survived. Just rumors, recovered letters, and one caseworker's report that disappeared from the state archives in 1973. But in those fragments, in those unsent letters found under a floorboard during a flood, something emerged. A shape, a pattern, a bloodline bent too far inward. Not his grandsons, but his sons, a grandfather was raising. If you're still here, already you're staring too deep. But that's what you came for, isn't it? A look into the family no one wanted to remember and the twins who weren't supposed to survive. As the boys, they were known only, even well into their teens. No birth certificates, no school enrollment, no mention in church rosters, just whispered sightings, two pale figures seen on the edge of the treeline at dusk, standing motionless while their grandfather collected mail once every 2 weeks. One witness, a traveling merchant who sold tools up in Leslie County, claimed he saw them in 1949, said they stared at him from the porch like they'd never seen a stranger before. As mirror images carved wrong, he described their faces, sloped foreheads, narrow, slanted eyes. With a limp that didn't match any visible injury, one walked. The other blinked too slowly like it took effort. But it wasn't just the way they looked. It was the stillness. They didn't fidget, didn't speak, didn't smile, he said, just stared as if something inside had already turned to stone. The first outsider suspicion was brought by the merchant. After that visit, he wrote a letter to the county welfare office. Not because of cruelty. He saw no bruises, no chains, but because, in his words, no child should look that empty. But the letter went unanswered. By then, Hyen was full of forgotten people. Mining towns were collapsing, families were leaving, roads were washing out. About strange twins, a call from a dirt-poor hauler didn't even make the bottom of the pile. What the merchant didn't see was what no one knew. Except when forced, the boys never left the house. In silence, the grandfather fed them, sitting across the table with a rifle leaned against the wall. He spoke in old phrases, words they'd never heard from anyone else, called them my repeats, told them they were chosen. He never let them look in mirrors, covered everyone in burlap. Their faces weren't theirs, he told them, that they came from a time before names, and the boys believed him. They had nothing else to believe in. No EOS, other no birth, just the cabin, just the man and each other. But even in silence, something always leaks out. Scraps were begun writing by one of the boys, mostly bits of thoughts carved with a nail into the underside of the bed. I was born too late, he says. My brother cries without sound. We share the same night. Not until 1953 did someone finally cross the boundary. Evelyn Cross was her name, a young woman from Louisville sent as part of a failing outreach program meant to document and assist Appalachian families living in extreme isolation. She was 24, idealistic, and far too trusting. Nearly 5 miles alone into the hollow she hiked, county records show, after her driver refused to go further down the washed-out road. A lot behind, Evelyn didn't leave, just her journal recovered years later in an estate sale in Harlan and a handful of photographs. Haunting, grainy, and unfocused are the pictures, but unmistakable. Two boys sitting on the porch of a rotting cabin, their clothes several sizes too large, their hands clenched together. In the next frame, the grandfather appears, face obscured by motion blur, his outline rigid, one arm raised like he's about to speak or strike. The final photo is of the ground, snapped by accident, likely during her abrupt departure. Calm at first are Evelyn's notes, descriptions of the landscape, the poverty, the eeriness of the hollow. But by the second day, her tone shifts. There's something wrong with the boys, she writes. In fragments, they speak, unfinished sentences. Of each other's hands, they won't let go. When I asked if they had a mother, they both pointed to the same tree. What she saw, she tried to report, but the local office dismissed her. Another scandal in the hills, no one wanted to stir up. To drop it, to move on, to focus on families that could still be helped, they told her. But twice, Evelyn returned. And on her final visit, she stayed the night. There is something in the way they breathe, reads her last journal entry. It's like watching lungs that never learned how. To Louisville, she never returned. Her body wasn't found. As a presumed accident, the case was quietly closed. But one dark detail no one could explain. In fabric from one of the twins' shirts, her journal was wrapped. Of earth and something faintly metallic, it smelled. Blood maybe or iron. The same week, the sheriff's deputy who filed the evidence resigned. They weren't raised by him, he told his wife. They were forged by him. The marrow of local myth has become what happened in that cabin between 1953 and 1954. A mixture of memory, fear, and whatever truth still clings to rotting wood. Through 3 generations of the Langford family, who live closest to the edge of the hollow, a story is passed down. One morning in the spring of '54, the youngest son, Caleb, now in his 80s, says he saw smoke rising from the trees where the old man's cabin should have been. Not thick, not like fire, just a slow, curling haze that hung in the sky like it didn't want to leave. Halfway up the hill, he rode his mule, then stopped. Strange smelled the air, like wet copper and mold. A sound he never forgot, he says he heard. Not a scream, not quite. Something more hollow, like grief trying to find a mouth. That same week, an anonymous package was received by the county clerk. Inside, a single sheet of paper, hand-typed. No return address, no signature, just 14 words. The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun. The area they searched 2 weeks later. A federal team, mostly unfamiliar with the landscape, guided by incomplete maps and shaky reports. Burned had the cabin been. Not from the outside, but from the inside out, like it imploded. No bodies were found, just fragments, a jawbone, a child's shoe, several teeth, all from the same mouth. But 2 small impressions in the ash puzzled the team. 2 sets of footprints, bare, walking side by side toward the creek bed and vanishing into the mud. Never seen again was the grandfather. Never found were the twins, but stories continued. In 1956, a hunter claimed he saw them by moonlight, standing in the shallows of a creek, arms linked, faces turned toward the water. When he shouted, they vanished. In '62, a retired teacher passing through said she met 2 silent boys hitchhiking near Pikeville, their skin pale as poplar, their eyes never blinking. She offered them a ride. "We're going back," one whispered. The same way ended each of these stories. No proof, no names, just a memory too strange to retell without trembling. By the time the 1970s arrived, folklore had the twins become. Not to wander too deep into the woods after dusk, parents warned their children, lest the mirror boys find them. Through eastern Kentucky, campfire tales spread like ash on wind. Of children hearing whispers in the trees, of two identical figures staring through cabin windows, unmoving even when spotted, stories were told. Ghosts, some thought they were. Something worse, others believed. Not dead, not living, just left behind. But not everyone dismissed the past as myth. One man didn't. Dr. Marshall Greaves was a retired psychiatrist from Ohio who moved to the area in 1971 for quiet. Or so he said. Because of Evelyn Cross, in truth, he'd come. His student she had been once, and her disappearance haunted him. The stories he believed, or at least enough of them, to start digging. A small home outside Hyen he rented and spent years collecting anything tied to the twins. Interviews, hospital records, police reports, handwritten testimonies from elderly neighbors. What he found disturbed him, not because it proved what happened, but because so much of it had been deliberately erased. Something few others had seen, Greaves noted. In the county's birth registries, there were missing family records. Entire branches of one bloodline that seemed to vanish after 1912. And when he followed those names backward, to a single family they all traced, the Merriweathers. After a scandal involving inappropriate relations between siblings, one branch had migrated into the mountains. By 1920, no male heirs remained. On paper, they'd vanished. But Greaves believed otherwise. Not just inbred, he claimed that the twins were, but the product of several generations of closed-loop reproduction. Each generation folding inward like paper, a genetic spiral into deformity, silence, and possible psychosis. Not a guardian, the grandfather, Greaves believed, was. He was an architect, the final bricklayer in a structure made of flesh and madness. Before he could publish his findings, Greaves disappeared. Empty was his trailer found. The door wide open. On the kitchen table. All his files stacked neatly and one photograph left on top. A photo of two boys standing in a shallow creek, arms locked, heads tilted toward the camera, eyes that didn't reflect light. A strange weight is to silence, the kind that collects over years, compounding until it feels like pressure in the soil. That is what remains of the twin story now. Not evidence, not memory, just weight. In 1992, a new road construction project outside Hyen required excavation deep into the hills. What they thought were animal bones, workers unearthed. When the state anthropologist arrived, he determined they belonged to at least 3 human children, none older than 10. Skulls misshapen, teeth in irregular patterns, some fused at the jaw, no matching missing persons reports, no cause of death, no graves nearby, just buried together as if the earth itself had tried to smother the memory. One forensic assistant, who later quit the field entirely, described the skulls as too similar to be coincidence, too wrong to be twins. An anomaly she noted, a shallow carving on one of the jawbones, a faint symbol resembling an infinity loop etched post-mortem with something sharp. As indeterminate historical remains, the file was closed, but the local community knew better. They didn't say it, not aloud, but you could see it in their eyes. That year, the Langfords moved away. So did the Bartley family, families who'd lived there for generations. When asked why, most just said, "It's time to go." But stories never die. They rot. They warp. In 2007, hikers found a crude wooden cross half buried near the creek where the twins were last seen. Tied to it with rusted wire, a children's pair of shoes, perfectly preserved, the kind worn in the 1950s, beneath them, scrolled into the wood, same blood, same soul, same end. No one claimed responsibility. By a true crime podcast in 2013, a private investigator was hired, traced the story of the twins through whispered interviews and unlisted death certificates. Simple and terrifying was his conclusion. The family hadn't ended. It had simply gone deeper, off the grid, into the hollows, where names are traded like rumors and the past isn't dead, just breathing under floorboards. Maybe the twins never died. Maybe they weren't even twins in the way we understand. Maybe they were the last visible part of something older. A lineage hidden in plain sight, folded in on itself so many times that it created something unrecognizable. If you're still watching, already you're braver than most. Tell us in the comments what would you have done if this was your bloodline. In 2019 was the last known sighting. Over a remote portion of the Kentucky wilderness, a government drone surveying for fire risks captured a 15-second video. As inconclusive wildlife imagery, the footage was dismissed by officials. But a technician who leaked the clip before being fired insisted it showed something else. Two figures, thin, barefoot, moving slowly through the underbrush with unnatural synchronicity. The same way, their heads tilted. In unison, their arms swinging. Even in low-resolution grayscale, something deeply wrong was about their movement. Too precise, too mirrored, as if they weren't walking, but performing. No follow-up search was ever conducted. From public record, the footage vanished 2 weeks later. But that technician didn't stop looking. In an anonymous forum post just before he disappeared, he wrote, "It's not that they survived, it's that someone wanted them to." Evidence of mail routed through rural post offices under the Meriwether name, he claimed he found, all sent from different addresses, none traceable to real homes, all within a 40-mile radius of that cabin's remains. And then silence. With fragments, we are left, scraps of bone, photographs with hollow stares, burned journals, second-hand stories passed like infection through Appalachian bloodlines. But no final answer, no grave, no confirmed death, just the impression, heavy, persistent, that something was born in that hollow and never left. A grandfather whose records don't exist. A pair of boys who may never have been boys at all. A family tree with no branches, just a loop twisted into flesh and fed across generations like a sickness. They say the past dies if you don't speak of it. But not this one. Like smoke in old wood, this story clings, like fingerprints beneath peeling wallpaper. The more you try to forget it, the deeper it settles. And maybe that's the real horror. Not what happened, but how easy it is for the earth to hide it. Somewhere out there in the quietest folds of America, there are still places where the blood runs in circles and no one comes looking. One of them you've just heard, and now you know what you weren't supposed to.